Appreciate you. My name is Wes Hunting Jr. I'm a fully functioning glass artist that operates right outside of town here. This is actually really exciting for me because I see a lot of familiar faces, and there are people that are very intimately aware of what we do over at our studio over our private property on Oak Tree Acres here. And I also see some new faces. So this is a nice way to kind of create continuity of people knowing what we do, because we are kind of just weirdos in the woods out there. And I'm sure that some of us, people that have come to know me at first, were thinking, what are they doing back there? It's so strange. Like, our business model is very bespoke in the sense that we don't do a lot of business in Wisconsin, let alone the local area. So tonight will be a nice little kind of introduction on who we are and what we do. So as I mentioned, we are studio glass artists. My father started learning the art of glass blowing in 1976 when he was studying at Kent State University, which is a major college in Ohio, where my mother and my father are independently born and raised. When my father was studying there, he discovered glasswork, which at the time, now this is the studio that was functioning at Kent at the time, Kent was one of only two major collegiate opportunities to get your hands into glass in the country. The other being, funny enough, UW-Madison. UW-Madison has a very, very robust history of kind of being the main vein of the American glass movement, which is something I'll be touching on in a little bit. When my father started studying, when he first started going to school, he didn't really know what he wanted to do, didn't know about glass. He was taking ceramics class, he was painting a lot. When he was kind of cutting his teeth in his younger years, he knew that he was inherently creative and was trying to figure out the outlet. Now, when he was going to school, independently from this, he had taken up a job mowing lawns at Hale Homestead, which essentially was like these like independently run Renaissance fair places, though this one was very permanent. It's this kind of permanent fixture, like right outside of the area where you can go in, and there's the old school blacksmithing and old school textiles, and if anyone has ever done the Renaissance kind of thing, you already get the shtick. Now within that, they also had a very, very crude glass blowing facility where they had a wood-fired glass furnace, which is incredible because, as when we touch to in a minute, the glass furnace is burning at about 2,000 degrees. So the way these guys used to do it back in the old days is absolutely astounding. So he started there mowing lawns, and one day the guy and the assistant who ran the glass department there had a falling out or something like this, and they both peeled off and said, we're out of here. And the person that was running the place, for some reason, how it happened, ran up to my father and a couple other guys that were standing around at the moment and said, you guys need to get in here because we have, that day we have a particular group and we need someone going in there. And they came in, and that was literally the first day my father ever touched glass, was being thrown into this strange studio, strange foreign substance, and just told to do it in front of a crowd, not unlike yourself. And though I'll never know because I wasn't there yet, so to speak, he had told me that he essentially fell in love, if not was frightened, but he's not here to refute that, but he experienced the material and thought it was really cool, and he went on to do this for a few weeks, working at this little job. Now, when he discovered independently from that Kent had a glassblowing program, he decided I should look into this, and he did. He started studying. He developed a culture, this is a little bit of a skip here, these are some paintings he was doing while he was in college. He was doing these very, kind of, avant-garde, kind of surrealist painting, landscape / figurative sculpture. More a little grotesque. This is moving on to something that he started working when he started working with the glass. He discovered this around his sophomore year, started studying, got into it in a big way, and then that became his career very clearly as he was graduating. When he moved on, he started doing these really kind of like arts, like avant-garde, wild things. And this was a really interesting time to be part of the glass movement, because the glass movement, as far as the Americans are concerned, was at its absolute infancy. There essentially was no American glass at this time. And as I'll talk about as we move forward here, it was a fascinating time for people that were the contemporary to my father, as well as my father, because they kind of grew up in this like particular medium that was starting at zero. Painting and all these things have been going on for hundreds of years in America already, but glass was just starting. And when we move on here, we'll see how experimental it was. We're talking that it's 1978, no one knows anything about this stuff, and they're just getting weird with it. He started doing these big flat murals. This is a piece that would be about this big. It was a wall-mounted display, and he started doing these things. This is actually his college professor, Henry Halem, who is considered one of a couple other men, Harvey Littleton and Dominic Bino being the other two, kind of like the Godfather trio of the American glass movement. Not to talk too splitsy here, here's some of his contemporaries, Jose Chartier, Mark Janke, and a couple of these other glass guys that were all, this was a reunion that we had at Kent just a few years ago. My father right here, just to fill it out with anybody. So, if we fast forward, my father's graduated school. He had met my mother at Kent State, who was a painter and a dancer. And my father was like, I have the skill, I'm really excited about it, what do we do? They decided to move along with my mother, who had just gotten into grad school at the Chicago Institute of Art. And my dad said, all right, I'm coming along with you, you're going to do that, and I'm going to open up a glass studio. So this is his first studio, right this building here actually. This was like a industrial baker at the time. And they moved in around Diversity of Southport, which is essentially Lincoln Park in Chicago. Right now the year is 1980, I believe. And he found a freestanding structure where him and my mother moved into place. This was his very first studio. If anyone had ever been to our studio, I know a few of you have, you'll see that this is incredibly bare bones. This is also worth mentioning that this is at a time where the glass small studio movement had no backing industry. So all these guys who wanted to get into the glass thing had to build all their equipment themselves. Within that thought, almost no backing knowledge. I mean, this is all foreign. I mean, these guys my father being one, would take their schematics that they would find. Like this was literally a design that was originally based on a glass furnace that Corning incorporated or a window manufacturer would use. This would be a glass furnace that would be the size of this room, and these guys were figuring out how to break down the materials, break down the science into something that's just 3 feet in diameter. Very fascinating time for these guys. So what I'm doing is laying the foundation down here. This is another slide. There was a train that was running through his little area there. This is the area of Chicago that at the time was very, very kind of commercial, freestanding structures. It was kind of just no one hung out there. It was kind of this weird main vein that was just like a forgotten area of the district. Now it's very, for lack of a better term, gentrified. As I understand it, the park area has become kind of like a condo kind of place. My father, anecdotally, had the opportunity to buy his building in 1986 for $60,000, and he turned it down to move up here with my mother, and then later found out that his landlord sold it 2 years later for $1 million. So he feels that's one of those anecdotes that I would normally leave for a barroom discussion. But I think it feeds into the infancy of like what it was like to kind of be in the trenches while developing work. This is a really nice shot of my father starting out. So he's probably literally, actually a hair younger than what I am now. He's probably 35 right now. Starting, this is just a small piece he has in a annealing oven in the studio. And this is a great place to kind of bring it forward onto the next stage. So he starts developing a body of work, and which is important for any artist. Creatively and also on a business standpoint, important to find an outlet to sell work. These pieces that he started developing, we call the color field pieces. A little bit more forward. These pieces are called the color field pieces, and this is essentially the main vein body of work that has translated from my father from moving to Chicago to here, and also the pieces that I produce today. There's a little bit from here to there, but we will lay the foundation to get there. So he's in Chicago, presumably broke, just trying to get day by day, month by month, developing this body of work and keeping a business afloat. So he developed a series of pieces that are very home decor oriented. He started working with Italian techniques that he learned in school and also studying outside of school. It's worth mentioning he moved to Italy for about 6 months to study at the Veneti factory, which is a major factory in Murano that produces like Italian glassware, paperweights, vessel work, things like that. And very particularly the ornate elements that are in all of the pieces that we do. I'll actually take a moment to stop right here to talk about that. The pieces that we do are very Italian inspired. The elements that you see inside, in fact, I'm going to take this, contain all these little dots, these little pieces of imagery, okay? And actually I'd like to take a moment to kind of walk through the aisle here so you guys have an opportunity to kind of really see it up close. you'll see that all these pieces have these little dots, these little elements, okay? And those are called Marini, Millefiori, Latticino, Sanferico, all these really, really hoity-toity Italian names. And they're all different designs that you make by creating these glass elements before producing the piece. So everything you see in there that's kind of a tangible form was actually a physical object, be it a bead or like a pencil-length piece of cane that was produced beforehand, that's produced and then put into the piece. In a little bit, we'll move on more to the actual process of it. So,
Wes,
yes.
does he or he, do you both produce those things first?
We do, absolutely.
Oh, you do, oh, okay.
Absolutely. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here.
Yeah.
I'm realizing the slideshow I have is kind of a little discombobulated. And I also want to make sure I'm not keeping you here till midnight. So, we'll keep it short and sweet enough. So now we kind of laid the foundation, and my father was in Chicago in the 80s, was taking these techniques that he learned in school and studying abroad, working with other glass artists, and was trying to develop a artistic product that A, met his vision and also had marketability. So from there, we fast forward to around 1986. My father and my mother became wonderfully pregnant with me, and they decided they want to get out of the metropolitan area, and they didn't know what they wanted to do. They just knew they wanted to go somewhere and couldn't figure it out. My father, doing art shows this whole time, which the primary way he was generating revenue was producing work and taking it to street fairs, which is essentially how, forget glassblowers for a second, all artists in the 80s and 90s were operating. You produce a body of work, you drive to a metropolitan area, and you do street fairs, gallery work, all this kind of stuff. And while doing a street fair, he met a man and a woman named Robert Carlson and Mary Lee Hall. And Robert Carlson and Mary Lee Hall were ceramicists that actually moved to Princeton in 1985 and built this house right here. They lived here, they're originally from Tennessee. They lived here for one summer and one winter. They decided that they hated the winter and they didn't want to live here anymore. Now I understand that might be a bit of a turnoff, and especially in the spirit of what we're talking about here, but my father and my mother, who absolutely love the winter weather and love the seasons, were looking north from Chicago to move up somewhere in Wisconsin. Now they're sitting next to each other in a booth in Chicago, let's call it Old Town, working, and they discovered that they had this very symbiotic moment where they wanted to get rid of a house, we wanted to get a house. So you can actually follow out what happened there. My father and mother moved up here in 87. They have me, and this is a shot of our property today. He's since built the studio up and the house up and all these kind of things. So now we're actually getting more into the meat of what's been happening right here in Princeton for the last 25 years. My father has this house, again, right outside Oak Tree Acres, and we operate this studio where we produce all the pieces that we do. And like I said, just a mile down the road here. And this is an example of the furnace that we have built that's running live, literally burning at 2,000 degrees as we speak. And that's what we do every day. I'll turn it kind of more over to what we do to operate to market our work. Our business model is very bespoke. I had mentioned before, we don't do any business in Wisconsin, short of a couple of museums. We work with the Madison Museum. Sheboygan Kohler Art Center has a museum store that we work with, the Bergster Mahler Museum, which is out in Neenah. If you have any questions about some of these local places to see glass work after the lecture, I'd be happy to oblige. But other than that, we primarily do gallery work around the country. This is a shot of our studio. This is us pulling a length of cane. Now, this is a perfect segue into what you really want to hear about, and that's the work itself. The pieces I had mentioned before, I was talking about these little pieces of glass that we make. Shame on me for not bringing any examples, but we'll have to make do here. So when you see these like striped objects that are rolling through these pieces, you can see in the back even these pieces of white. There's actually a trio of 3 white cane. We call it veil cane for short. And the way we produce it is actually heating up a large mass of liquid glass, coloring the outside surface, so essentially the exterior of it, and then pulling it into a length of cane. So to give you a little understanding, you can see my father standing here, I'm presumably on the other side here, and right now this piece of glass, which is absolutely hot, is being pulled. Now right here is probably at about like 12 feet, but ultimately we pull to about 30 feet. And then we take those sections, let it cool, and when it cools it becomes hard, and we're able to cut it into various objects that we then impregnate into the piece when we're working with it. I will take a moment here before I move into the kind of the bodies of work that we do. Does anyone have any questions moving up to kind of the moment now?
So you're cutting these with gloves on. What are you doing with the pieces after you're done cutting?
So perfect question. What we are doing with the pieces is layering them in an annealing oven. So has anyone ever done any slump work before, or any sort of glass work of any kind? And that could be like torch work, lamp working, slump working, meaning when you take pieces of glass, put them in an oven just to kind of melt it into a sheet. Oh, totally green crowd. All right. Maybe we should be doing this at the studio sometime.
Yeah.
To answer your question, what we are doing is imagine, like, for example, that long length of cane. Shame on me, but I'm not wearing gloves usually when I do it, but I appreciate you having safety first in your thoughts. What we are doing is cutting those sections. So imagine like cutting like this big 40-foot piece of cane right here that's about a pencil wide thick. We cut like exactly like 5 inches like that. And we lay them into an annealing oven. Now an annealing oven is essentially a ceramic kiln. That might be something that's more digestible for you guys. I'm sure you have had some proximity in a ceramic kiln at some point. You know, it's essentially an electric oven designed to go well and beyond what your normal convection oven would go at home or your convection oven would at home. So we'll take these pieces, we'll put them in an oven, not unlike what you saw in this oven here. I'll go back a little bit, and preheat them. So for example, we'll take all these elements, preheat them. That's the shot I wanted. Interesting anecdote, the frame of this oven is actually in our studio and we use it to this day, so there's a lot of family history in the things we do. But you can see that the oven is lined with these electric elements and they're designed to go up to anywhere from room temperature up to about 1300 degrees. So for example, what I was describing there, all these elements that we cut and make beforehand, we load into an oven and then bring it up to about 1000 degrees, which is essentially halfway between room temperature and the total melting point, and then we melted it into the piece. If anyone has any interest beyond this lecture, you can visit us at our website, westhuntingglass.com, where we have a documentary video and additional other videography of us actually producing it. It's a little tricky to kind of explain it. It's one of those things you kind of just have to see to understand. But I'll try my best to kind of explain it as we move here. Just to kind of keep things moving along, so now it's the late 80s, early 90s. My father's developing this body of work that is trying to become marketable. Now I've been bringing that up quite a bit and not really explaining what I mean by that. And this will move into our fundamental business model that kind of keeps the lights on, as it were. The way that we make a living is we work with galleries around the country at different billing capacities, wholesale, consignment, and I can spare you the details on that. But we essentially have 35 to 40 galleries around the country representing us in some capacity, mostly in kind of metropolitan areas in the South, mostly Florida. Santa Fe has a really nice gallery that's representing us right now, Tucson, Colorado, Denver area. That will shift as I develop and lose these relationships like any business over the years. And we kind of cultivate this group of galleries that put our work in front of collectors. And that's what we do to try to cut our bread and butter. So what I'm going to do here is kind of just move along in the slideshow. This is essentially a showcase of the work of the Colorfield series. Now, this is a Colorfield piece, and that's a Colorfield piece, but you notice that they don't really look a lot alike. And this is my favorite thing to talk about when I'm talking about the glass work, is my father is very unique in that he's had this body of work that he's never stopped working on. He produces them daily, produces hundreds of years, but he's always kind of had this thought that the work needs to be growing at all times. And watching the work grow, for example, this would be a piece from 1988, 1990, and then watching it move forward into, now this is a piece that would be more mid-90s. You can see that jump from here to here, and then from here to here is very notable. And that's one way my father's always wanted to work. With that in mind, I think I'll touch a little bit about what our thought process is when we're producing the imagery. For example, I keep talking about Millefiori, Latticino, Zanfirico, all these Italian things. There's a kind of chaotic nature inherent in the work that we do, and that's completely at the mercy of any artist. You have your abstract artists, your realist artists, when we're talking about painting, and that same thought process translates to the surface decor on glass. This isn't, what at first glance is very chaotic, almost, you would think a thoughtless production. but there's actually a lot of thought on how to layer these things correctly to produce an attractive object. You'll notice here, much like a painter would approach a landscape, there's a very thoughtful thing going on where we have dynamic background imagery. Right here you can see there's this dynamic, color background. We have these blues and purples and things like that. And then that is broken up by these large geometric shapes. I call them shards for slang at the studio. And I'll actually bring it up in real time here and point that translation. You'll see here we kind of have, these are particularly more muted, but here we have this large geometric shape of blue. And here this kind of like periwinkle, kind of like washed purple going on here. And we put those things in the piece to divide the foreground and the background. And that's something we're always thinking about when we're conceiving any particular piece. The idea is that you don't want the detailed imagery being lost amongst the background colors. So for example, we look at this piece here, you have these dynamic aquas, this kind of like burgundy, garnet red in the background, but the foreground small dots, all these colorful decorations aren't lost there because they have kind of this barrier of colors that kind of divide the foreground and background. So that's something we try to think about when we approach producing these three-dimensional objects in, these kind of two-dimensional surfaces in three-dimensional form. We'll kind of move on here a little bit. So now we're in the mid-90s, rolling around. My father started experimenting with different shapes. We have kind of a charismatic line of like these traditional home decor shapes and vessels and jars. I have additional samples up here that we can walk through and check out as we move on. And that's what we kind of done, is develop. Now we're moving into something very recent. This would be in the last 10 years. We have these things that have gotten much more colorful and vibrant. I had mentioned before, when we are marketing, we try to produce pieces that'll be attractive in particular markets. So something we'll think of here is just absolutely Florida coast. We'll do very, very, very well in a gallery in St. Petersburg, Florida, or West Palm Beach, Florida, or something like that. And we try to think about those things. This is very more muted and kind of darker in tone, really good for New England area. This is a piece that would sell very well in Massachusetts or something like this. Those are things that we think about. This screams Tucson, Arizona, if you don't let me call it out. And not for nothing, these are the color palettes that work really well with those particular things. We work in different scales. Now, this was a private piece that we did probably about 10 years ago. These things were actually massive. These were all 40 inches tall. Wow. Very, very, very large work. That kind of, it gives a demonstrative of the scale that you can work with when you're producing pieces like this. Another custom piece that we did, this was for a custom loft style apartment in Chicago. I think the tallest one was 40 inches tall. Are we going to the thing?
Hey Wes, I have a question for you.
Yes, please.
So, does all glass start out colorless and then you control the pigments, or do you buy different colored glass to start with and you melt that?
Well, very astute, because you essentially answered my question. You answered your own question there. But I thank you because you're bringing up a point that actually would be more inherently interesting. When we're producing these pieces, we are using glass materials. Now, to give it real short, because I'm sure you've noticed I can ramble on and on about this, but the short is, as you may or may not know, all clear glass is essentially made out of sand, soda ash, and lime, okay, calcium carbonate, that kind of thing. And that's what produces, and some other stuff too, but we'll skip that part. That's the essentials, okay. Now, that's what produces clear glass. Now, when you want to produce a colored glass, you need to add a metal oxide to it, okay? So sand, soda ash, lime, and then a metal oxide produces pigment. I keep bringing ceramics up because those mediums are almost brother-sister mediums in terms of when you're working with ceramic glazes, it's identical in the sense of the metal oxides will produce the colored glasses. To very specifically answer your question, we don't produce our glass from scratch in-house. When I'm talking about metal oxides, I am talking about the big boys here. We're talking about cadmium, we're talking about selenium, we're talking about arsenic, we're talking about chrome oxide. Essentially almost every elemental metal will do something to produce a pigment in glass in the upper chain of the periodic table. There's an inherent toxic nature to that. And so we don't produce from scratch at our facility. We purchase our glass. We actually buy internationally. We buy from a brand called Reichenbach Colors that produce massive scales of it that kind of work as a vendor for glass artists in the United States. It's produced in the Czech Republic by a company that operates in Germany. Really, really nice colors. It's also worth mentioning, it always scares people when I talk about the metal oxides and the toxic nature of it. When you actually melt the glass, that is completely eliminated. Even the glass, color glass you'd have at home will have trace elements of this stuff, but once that reaction has taken place and it's turned to glass, it's nothing in common at all. For example, this nice beet tomato red would certainly be a cadmium oxide that would produce that really kind of bold, bright red. Fascinating stuff. So like to answer your question, it's produced kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna move on here a little bit. I'm kind of lost in my slideshow, but you're kind of getting the idea of what's going on. You know, we've been operating outside of Princeton, and maybe that would be a moment to kind of talk about here. Princeton has been a lovely place to operate because it's very quiet, very serene. I had mentioned my analogy of being the weirdos in the woods. We love that because it is very relaxing to produce work in such a quiet environment. Again, I'm doing you a light disservice here by not having any videography to show you. I highly encourage you to look up glass blowing in general or look us up and take a look at what our studio looks like when we're working in real time. But I will tell you, it is kind of like an inherently chaotic environment. It's very loud. We have these large furnaces that are burning at about 2,000 degrees. The aforementioned materials we were talking about, the clear glass that we buy it by the ton in these pre-melted kind of nuggets and then melted in a furnace over a period of a couple of days where it turns optically pure, and then gather it and do our various production methods. You know, but that heat and the loudness of exhaust fans and all these things going on, you know, the material is inherently dangerous. You imagine this like quite literal lava that you're kind of playing with. I'm having a moment, having fun embellishing that to make it sound like I'm a hero warrior working with this stuff. And now I'll speak out of both sides of my mouth because when people are in the studio and experiencing it the first time, the natural apprehension is astounding. I mean, anyone when you first walk in there, it's just like, oh goodness, that's so hot. That's incredible. I get it. How do you do it? Are you wearing gloves? That kind of thing. It's like, it promotes that kind of nature. But I have found when you start working with this material after a few days, months, what I've discovered is actually it's really lazy. It's not very intimidating. It's really just this real sluggish kind of lava, just wants to kind of do its thing kind of material. And once you kind of approach it from that lens, it becomes way less overbearing to work with it. And it's kind of your opportunity to kind of actually experience it properly and all that. I think I'm going to kind of skip ahead here because I want to make sure we're good on time. Because the one thing I don't want to do is, like I said, have you here till midnight. Here's a fun little shot here. I'm going to get a little anecdotal here. So this is my father. This is the graveyard, as it were. You can see how large these pieces are. This is my father doing a gag here, kind of tossing them out. This would be out there, Oak Tree Acres, 1,000-gallon propane tank in the back. We'll talk a little bit about the supply chain of this in a moment. But when you're producing glass work, it's inherent that you're going to break some pieces. It's actually neurotic, like very neurotic inducing to work in this. I like to make jokes that when people have the opportunity to kind of see us work and break a piece and understand that kind of like gun to the head surgical precision that's required to work with it, that's why me and my father both kind of have this Cosmo Kramer energy. And I'm sure some of you that know me, and very even more so, know my father. I don't mind saying that when he's not in the room. But we have this really kind of alert and kind of high, aesthetic energy. I always joke that that's what kind of starts it. So you can see here, this is what would have presumed to have been thousands and thousands of dollars of work that is, it cracks, or this happened to it, or this something touched, or this like that. So there is an element.
So what do you do with that trash pile?
Tragically, well, that particular pile was probably, I was probably 3, so I don't know what happened to that particular pile. But we have developed a couple of piles over the years. I've even developed my own couple piles. And to answer your question, nothing. It's garbage.
You allow someone who wants glass pieces
Oh, Chris, I forgot all about this.
to
You
go
actually saw them.
dig through your pile.
You've seen the most recent pile.
Yeah.
You have to make sure you tell the class.
It's like it is. It takes up the size of this room up here. I kid you not. This one pile that he let me dig through.
To be more specific, you can take these broken pieces and do small projects with them. People ask us if we recycle it. I mean, not in our work. One thing, we do our work really well, and I would never want to, but there is, for the dollar amount that we ask for our work, there's an amount of kind of precision and quality that's expected. You know, I had mentioned some of these pieces that we have, that I wouldn't necessarily throw on the proverbial pile, but there are pieces that will have such an inconsequential flaw, but it goes from a $2,000 piece to whatever I can get for it, you know, in the happenstance of the future real quick. When you are selling to the high-end art community, there is a demand for quality. I would even offer the anecdote of when you start working with galleries that also demand this kind of perfection, it's in your best interest to have that mindset, because you start sending work to galleries that are kind of making your money for you, and you start sending some subpar quality, they'll cut you real quick. Because the art market, like any market, is competitive. And if you have your foot in the door and you have relationships with these people and stop following through on your end, you know, you'll have an account that, you know, was good for 20, 30 grand a year, all of a sudden stop calling you. And that's something that we think about and take very seriously when we're working with the materials in the glass.
So Wes, I have a question. When
Yes.
you're making these things, are they requesting, like, are they saying, I want something that's blue with these colors, or they're just saying we want this kind of, this look to it, like, how do you, or even if you're doing custom pieces for people, do they have an idea in their head of what they want it to look like, and then you do it? Is that, or?
So I'm shaking my head because yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
You know, the art market is such a strange market because any other industry has more of these defined parameters of how business is done.
Yeah.
The art market is so subjective. I mean, when you talk about just being a collector working with an artist and being, from a collector standpoint, I want to give you this amount of money and I want you to give me this object that I like very much.
Okay.
Even that can get quite complex. And you're just describing, some people are very much, I just want what you want to make. Please make it and I'll tell you if I like it.
Okay.
And then you have people that will approach you and say, well, I really want this particular thing. I saw this piece and I want exactly that, but without this, and I want this color and that and this.
Oh.
I've experienced both interactions. Sometimes they execute, sometimes they don't. That's the very subjective nature of working in that industry. Now, add a third perspective on this when you're working with a middleman, so to speak, of a gallery who is furnishing your ware in their gallery and also communicating with the collector. It can get very complex very quickly. I can't explain it more than that, except for to say, like, yes, I've had every single interaction that you described, if not more. That's what makes it kind of fun. Every day is kind of like this, you know, there's not really this like glass by the pound energy, it's every relationship's a little bit curated, every piece that you're sending has this like, they like it, they don't, they want more of it, they don't want more of it, there's this very, symbiotic and subjective relationship that you have with everyone you work with in the art industry, and that's kind of what people would say is the fun thing about it. Unless you're feeling particularly bad that day, then it's a not fun thing about it real quick. I'll do it. I'm looking for, I guess I'm kind of losing track here. I'm gonna kind of put it along. We've been talking so much about the color field work, and I want to start moving on to a couple other bodies of work that we do. I'll spend about 5 more minutes doing that, and then we'll just open up to final anecdotes and questions. This picture is just anecdotally a project that we did. I've been talking so much about working with galleries around the country. We also market in different ways. This is a nice example of like kind of a production run that we did. This was a nice gig. This was Corning Incorporated, who you may or may not know is like the leading kind of industrial scientific entity that produces glass. But we're talking like, in military settings and, Pyrex, like commercial settings, more functional scientific settings. But they're a big old company. And one thing they do every year is they ask an artist to produce they call it the Corning